Good morning. Hope you had a nice stay in Bruges. I'm very glad to welcome you all again back in this room to talk about the very interesting topic. Koen, can I have your attention? Koen Hermans.
Sorry.
Give the good example.
I will do that.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Heidi Degeriks. I'm the director of the Anti-Poverty Flemish Network, or the Network Against Poverty. I'm very glad to be your host again. And I have three amazing experts with me today. We will hear them out, we will talk with them, and I would really be very happy if you would engage with both of those three experts. We will first have the keynote of Professor Wim van Lancker on why should social work care about climate justice. And then we will have a talk with Karen and Christophe, who have a whole other forms of expertise. Karen is a social cultural worker, so she's in the field already more than 30 years, and she works with her community in Louvain with vulnerable groups. And then Christophe is a colleague of mine, and he's an expert by experience, and is very glad to be here with us also today. Wim, I give you the floor for your keynote. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Heidi, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here at the Social Work Conference, because I think the issue of climate change and social work is a very important issue and an underestimated one, in which inequalities are central to understand the problem of climate change, but also to understand the role social work as a profession, as a normative profession, striving for social change, striving for social justice, needs to play a role in. And the link between climate change, because in the introduction you mentioned he will talk about social workers caring about climate justice. My title is about climate change, and that is actually an interesting and relevant difference, because we can tackle climate change in different ways, very technical, very scientific ways, very rational ways, but this will not always ensure that we tackle climate change in a just way. And it is in particular that difference between the change in itself and the way to achieve a carbon-neutral society. 2050 should be the moment that we achieve a net zero society. That's, tomorrow, basically. So the problem is really pressing, but there are different routes to get there. And one of the key issues, or one of the important issues to understand the role of climate justice in the problem of climate change, is my own lifestyle. This is a picture I took at my school. I have three kids, 2.5, 7, and 9 years old. They're all at the same school now, which makes life much easier than it used to be. And, this is the entrance of the school. My cargo bike is the last one in the row. It's an Urban Arrow. I'm very proud of it. And with my fellow cargo bike lifestyle parents, we talk about it. We talk about cargo bikes. We talk about the additional seats that we installed in the cargo. And we talk about cargo bikes, but we also talk about life, we talk about school, we do things together. We go for a drink on Friday evening at the local bar with locally crafted beers. It's very helpful, very pleasant to meet people who look like you and who think like you. And this is one of the key issues that we need to understand to address climate change in a just way. We are all living in our own bubble, in our own social group. My reference group when I arrive at school are the highly educated two-earner families, two-earner parents, who think climate change is a very important issue that we need to address and that we need to adapt our own lifestyle. And that's why most of these people, myself included, deliberately make the choice to use a cargo bike for school, for transportation, for going shopping, for basically everything. you know, we are part of the solution, and we're proud of that. The key issue is that at the other entrance of the school, parents arrive with their cars. And there's even another entrance where parents arrive on foot. And there's a physical distance between these different entrances, and there's also a social and an economical distance between these different entrances. Those are parents who are living in different worlds, who are having different reference groups, who are, you know, who have different opinions about life, about climate change, about personal behavior and how to address it. And there's basically no connection between these different worlds. I have adopted a cargo bike lifestyle. That's actually a thing, apparently. But we cannot expect that everyone will adopt such a cargo bike lifestyle. Some people definitely need a car. But it's also a matter of identity. It's also a matter of expressing who you are, and you are comparing constantly. That's a basic sociological insight. You're comparing constantly with people who look exactly like you. Most of our friends, most of our social networks are basically people who are very similar to you in terms of level of education, in terms of, you know, attitudes towards life. And the problem is that these kinds of lifestyle issues sometimes lead to tensions. In many cities, you know, this cargo bike lifestyle is very visible, but that's also the place where there's often harsh opposition, where there's sometimes even violent protests against banning cars, for instance, to the benefits of bikes. There are reports in Brussels, but also elsewhere, that cargo bike riders are being negatively approached or even aggressively approached. But more generally, we observe across Europe that protests are often aimed at climate policies and that we don't see like broad-based public support for addressing the issue. And there's much to say about it, and I will come back to it at the end of my presentation. But the point I would like to stress from the beginning onwards is that there are clear, deep social, economic, and cultural divides in society, and these divides hamper progress towards achieving a just transition. And I think we need to address this problem head-on, and we need to work with that, and that's where social work comes in. But let's first talk about these social divides in Europe. If you look, for instance, at poverty rates, we see basically across the European Union, and these are figures for the 27 member states of the European Union, but also the euro area, and we see basically, you know, stability. So this idea, this deeply entrenched idea that poverty has been on the rise all the time, that is not what we see in the numbers, that's not what we see in the figures, that's not what happened basically across the board during the COVID pandemic. Because welfare states actually stepped in, provided social safety nets, which is actually sort of evidence that if you want to make policies to address poverty, you actually can, and it works. But this is, of course, an average. If we look a little bit beneath the surface, we see that for some specific groups in society, poverty rates have been increasing. For instance, if we look at tenants, people renting their home, poverty rates have increased from about 20 to 25%. Temporary workers, those people being engaged in paid labor but on temporary contracts, have seen their poverty risk rise from about 10% to about 17%. People who are unemployed saw their poverty risk increase from about 40 to 50%. Labor market outsiders, often low-skilled, are facing much higher poverty risk. The poverty risk for low-skilled people in Europe rose from about 23 to about 30%. So we see stability on the surface, but we see beneath the stability that for some risk groups in European societies, social and economic cleavages have been increased, that these social divides have become more salient, have become more important. And you also see this when you ask people how they feel about this. This is a measure of subjective poverty, basically the share of population indicating that they feel they cannot make ends meet, that they look anxiously to the future. Because if something happens, they feel I don't have any means, I don't have any opportunity to actually address this, to actually buffer a additional risk that would occur. And here we again see the same risk groups, the low-skilled people, unemployed people, those who are employed on temporary employment contracts. They indicate in much higher rates that they feel subjectively poor, that they feel they cannot make ends meet. But even among employed persons, we see that 14% of them across the board indicate they cannot make ends meet. These social divides are wide, and across Europe, we see that these social divides are actually increasing. Given that, while social divides are increasing, how can we attain climate targets? Basically meaning by 2030, a reduction of 50% across the board of emissions. 2030, we're 2024 today, that's within 6 years. That's not even tomorrow, that's overnight. And by 2050, achieving a net zero society. One key insight, according to me, to understand again how climate change policies can translate into a just transition, is that it is not only about luxury consumption. It is also about luxury consumption, and it is also about the top 1% having the kind of lifestyles that are very carbon intensive, right? They are living a life that is strongly associated with emissions, with carbon emissions. And I think we should think about how can we make them change their behavior? How can we make sure that they set a good example, which is not happening at all. But it's not only about them. It's about all of us. Around 2/3 of global carbon emissions are directly and indirectly linked to household consumption, about what we all are doing. And reducing household emissions, our emissions, will be crucial to attain these targets. And if you look at research trying to measure and quantify the share of households across Europe that are actually living a lifestyle that is in accordance with these targets, it's less than 5% across the EU. Less than 5% of EU households are living a lifestyle that is actually in line with the climate targets. That means it's not only about the top 1%. It's about how we live. It's about how we organize our society. It is about the carbon intensity of the fundamentals of our society. How we eat, how we travel around, how we live, and how we heat our homes, basically. And the problem is, of course, if we address these issues, and these are big issues that we need to address rapidly, so we're talking about deep and fast transformation of societies, and not only like this specific segment of society, but about how households live, how households are eating, how we move from one place to another, how we heat our homes. We need to change that kind of behavior. And we all need to do that. And this requires deep and fast transformation. But if we do that, we risk increasing these social, economic, and cultural divides. Because poor households are spending a much larger part of their household income on food, on home, on heating, on their cars, and the transportation means. And so if we say we need to increase prices, for instance, we need to punish bad behavior, right? We need to make sure that it's more expensive to emit, then you will increase inequalities. And then, of course, people will say, but these policies are not taking account of my needs, of my lifestyle, of the risks I am running. And so, an additional problem is that food and cars and homes are not only social and economic issues, but also cultural issues. It's also about lifestyles. It is about identities. It is about the identity of living the cargo bike lifestyle. It is about the identity of not living the cargo bike lifestyle and living different kinds of lifestyles. And you see, if you look at public support for climate policies, that we see a consistent pattern across different policy areas. Investments, subsidies are much more popular than regulation and taxes. And in particular, everything that has to do with food and cars is deeply unpopular. So if we really want to achieve this deep transformation, we really want to change the way we move around, that means we need to reduce the use of cars across Europe. This will be hugely unpopular. This is hugely unpopular. This is the key conundrum. Public support for social and climate policies follows the same social divides. It follows the same social divides, and we see that environmental and social policies tend to have different public support bases, which is likely to further deepen existing social divides if competition for resources intensifies. So this is really a problem. We see that what we need to do is deeply unpopular, but beneath this popular support, we see the same social divides as we see in the labor market. We see the same social divides as I see when I enter school with my cargo bike. That some people are entering the school, some people are entering society from different entrances, with different attitudes, different risks they are facing, with different levels of resources and different needs. And public support basically follows the exact same divides, which means that if we want to achieve a just transition, and we need to be all on board with this, this is really a deep problem. For instance, research from my colleague Adeline Otto has shown that across European societies, people do not tend to agree on what they want or what kind of policies they want to support. What we actually need is people supporting climate policies, drastic transformation of our societies, and what we need is public support for social policies that address these social and economic divides, that is actually able to reduce the levels of poverty, to reduce basically the gaps we see. We need to bring people together, and one of the first things we need to do to achieve that is to close these social and economic gaps, give people more opportunities to make different choices in life. But the problem is that's not what we see. If we look across the European Union, we see that about a quarter of the population, 23% actually, are what we call eco-social supporters. People who are willing to support policy making, policy implementation in both the realm of climate change and the realm of social policies and welfare states. These are usually people with higher incomes, with higher levels of education, who have a high trust in public institutions, strong support for egalitarianism, a bit left-wing party affiliation, living in urban, suburban areas, and who are not concerned about the future and a job, not concerned about the immediate future and a job, which is different, of course. But there's another side to this. We see that 28% in the European Union are what we call eco-social skeptics, people who are not willing to support political action in both social and climate policy realms. And those are people who are usually low-skilled, who are who have a strong distrust of institutions, a strong distrust of politics, strong distrust of governments, who are feeling concerned about the job, people for whom the end of the month is much nearer than the end of the planet, who are concerned about the bills they need to pay, and who have the feeling that they are being left out of politics, that politicians do not cater to their needs. And I think they are right. That policies are usually grafted on a particular part of the environment, a particular part of society. Usually highly educated people who know to use their voice when they need to, who have access to administrations, who know the way to society, who have social networks that they can use to make sure that if risks occur, that they have ways to buffer those risks. And so we see deep cleavages. And if we dig a little bit deeper and we look at research that is trying to figure out what is now really driving these divides. I mean, it's an economic divide, it's a social divide. This also shows in lifestyles and identities, which makes often these debates very polarized. But what is behind this? Well, time and again, we see the same thing. The feeling of not being treated fairly. The perception of fairness is the biggest driver, the strongest driver of opposition to climate policies. People who feel that they are not treated correctly, that they are not treated just by policies, by governments, but also by their fellow citizens, or even by the cargo bike people on the other end of the school entrance. That is key, and we need to recognize this. We need to work with this, because this is key to change individual as well as collective behavior. And second, this is from recent OECD research, opposition against climate policies is strongly related to fossil fuel dependency. Those same people who are feeling left out, who perceive policies to be unjust because they risk hurting them most, who are distrust, who feel a strong distrust against policies and against governments and against politics, also the same people who are much more dependent on fossil fuels to make a living. As long as there are no affordable and accessible alternatives available for living, for heating, for moving around, then broad public support for strong climate policies will be low. And we will not have this sort of joint mutual feeling that we're all in this together. Because we're not in this together. That's the big issue. And so the cargo bike lifestyle is not for everyone. We cannot just assume that, if some people will show the lead and give a good example, and policies are grafted on supporting that kind of lifestyle, that everyone will follow suit. That is simply not the case. But policies do cater for specific sets of policies and for specific sets of behaviors. If you look at research, measuring, quantifying what the most effective behavioral changes are that households can do to reduce to reduce emissions. Now we see that in the realm of transportation, it's about living car-free, or it's about driving electric. In the realm of food, it's about adopting a vegetarian or a vegan diet. In the realm of electricity and energy use in homes, it's about renewable electricity, solar panels. It's about refurbishment and renovations. And those are exactly the things people with a cargo bike would do, will do, and are doing. In many countries, climate policies are geared towards subsidies and investments because that is the most popular in society, if you remember. Subsidies and investments encouraging people to adopt a different lifestyle. Homes need to be renovated. We will provide subsidies to people if they start renovating their homes. We will encourage people to put solar panels on the roof because that makes a very big difference. It's important that we do this. But the problem is this is only accessible for one specific part of the population, those people adopting this cargo bike lifestyle, higher educated people, two-earner families, who trust people, who trust government, who trust institutions, and who have the resources and the means to actually start adopting this lifestyle. But if you have no alternative, if you are a tenant and you're renting your home, and it's freezing in the winter, and you can only heat with gas or with oil, there's no alternative. In Belgium, one of the richest member states in the European Union, a quarter of the population cannot spend 1,000 euros when they would need to. So if there is a surprise expense of about 1,000 euros, they simply cannot make that. You cannot expect people in that sort of circumstances to say, okay, but let's invest in our homes and let's renovate and let's, simply don't have the resources. So these social and economic cleavages, they are associated with different lifestyles, and we want people to adopt a climate neutral lifestyle, but people will not do this automatically because of these social cleavages. And the problem is, if we need to have public support for enacting drastic policies, there is also no public support for doing that, because the same social and economic cleavages are important there. And so this is where we are. Poorer households are not responsible for climate change, but they are much more affected by its consequences. They are dependent on fossil fuels. Climate policies that garner sufficient popular support are often inaccessible to poorer households or affect them negatively, right? They outright can affect them negatively while benefiting richer households. Again, for Belgium, for instance, but this is the case in many countries, about 60% of government expenses directly go to the highest income brackets. Because of this whole subsidy system, and people who are adopting this, people who are putting solar panels on the roof, who are refurbishing their homes, who are having an electric car, those are people higher up in the income distribution with specific attitudes, a specific type of lifestyle. And so this risks further increasing existing social divides. This increases polarization and in turn reduces support, the support that we need for these necessary policies. And it's a matter of voice as well. Having the feeling that your voice, your needs, that people listen to that and do this, or do something with that. And so if we're talking about a just transition, but not only a climate transition, but a just transition, it means leaving no one behind, but that's not where we are at the moment. Climate policies are characterized by what my good friend and my favorite singer-songwriter Leonard Cohen has called the poor stay poor, the rich get rich. That's how it goes. Everybody knows. And basically climate policies are, an example of a Matthew effect in which government expenses, government policies are actually benefiting those households who are already better off more than they are benefiting poor households. But that's very pessimistic, of course. That's how it goes, everybody knows. I think we should be more optimistic, and I think social work can play a role in this, in finding the crack in everything, because that's how the light gets in. And I hope if you go home tonight that you will start listening to Leonard Cohen, and I have at least achieved something. What to do? How can we find the light that needs to get in? There are some principles that we can follow if we think about policies. And I will first talk about policies and then end with the role that social work can play in this, or social work professionals can play in this. First principle is quite simple, and basically all decent economists and sociologists and policymakers are advocating for this. Make polluters pay, but make sure that the revenues increase the fairness of your system. It's not only about making polluters pay and then stop. Because if you do that, you will hurt the poorest households the most, because they have no alternatives. We need to make sure that people adopt different lifestyles. We need to make sure that what we want to encourage is cheaper and what we want to discourage is more expensive, right? But use the revenues to increase fairness and to avoid the poorest households of being affected negatively. You can redistribute the revenues and make sure that it goes to those people who need support to make that transition. You can think about a sort of a dividend that you distribute across society so that people actually have additional cash to reduce these social and economic divides. At the European Union level, there's no social climate fund attached to the ETS2, to the emission trading system implemented at the European level. Member states are free to use those revenues, and it will be kind of, this will be in the range of billions of euros. They are free to use this at will. Member states can use the revenues from the Social Climate Fund, because energy prices will increase, but you can use those resources to really reduce the economic and social divides. We also need to think about strengthening European welfare states, enacting effective social policies, giving more, not always and every day and everywhere, but giving more in particular context to those who need more. We need to take the European pillar of social rights seriously. It is about making sure that children have access to high-quality services. It is about education being available for everyone. Those are the levers that we need to make sure that everyone can achieve a decent living standard in societies. It's about minimum income protection. At the European Union level, again, there's a minimum income recommendation, there's a minimum wage directive. These are the instruments, hardcore social policy making, that actually focuses on making sure that those with the lowest incomes have a good and decent living standards. Reducing the gaps will make it much more easier to change cultural identities and lifestyles. We need to invest into integrated eco-social policies. Not only social policies as some sort of isolated thing from climate policies and vice versa. Eco-social policies are really, from the beginning, integrating the two perspectives. And this is about providing alternatives to people. Public and social housing, for instance. I mean, it's basically a no-brainer, right? Most of the people who are living on low resources and who are tenants have a high poverty risk and are living in insecurity. By providing much more public and social housing, you can achieve social goals. If you ensure that this social housing is also as climate neutral as possible, then you kill two birds with one stone. You provide more security, more stability to people. People have the feeling that their needs are catered for, and they are living in homes, and they are heating their homes in a way that is good for attaining the climate targets. The same holds for circular economy or infrastructure works and so on and so forth. And again, the Social Climate Fund can be used to think about where will we invest in such a way that we actually increase the set of alternatives open up to people instead of reducing it. And the fourth principle is that we need to give voice to these people, co-develop and co-evaluate policy measures with all stakeholders. With all stakeholders in an inclusive way. And of course, everybody's saying that, right? We are inclusive, and we give voice to everyone. And we talk with all of the stakeholders. But I mean, really talking with, if you are at my school, not only talking to my fellow cargo bike riders, but also talking to the other people at the other side of the entrance. Taking their needs seriously, and vice versa. We need to bring people together in ways that is not top-down, in ways that, basically in ways that achieve equality and equity. And that is where social work has to play a key role. Social work, as a normative profession, has achieving social justice at its core. That is what we do. That is what you do. And since climate change and climate mitigation policies risks increasing these social divides, basically doing social work is doing eco-social work at the same time, because we need to address these social and economic divides. So the best role a social worker can play in addressing climate change is doing social work, with social justice, achieving social justice at its core. Because these economic and social divides are the underlying reason, the underlying elephant in the room that helps us explain why it is so difficult to achieve progress. But there's more to do. We need to really highlight that climate change is a distributional issue. It is a social issue, and it is not an issue of individual behavior. But again, that is nothing new for social workers. If social workers work with people living in poverty, that's what you highlight, right? It's not your individual fault. It is a systemic issue related to how labor markets are structured, how social security systems work, how entitlements are allocated to people. And the same basically holds for the problem of climate change. We need to politicize the issue and emphasize the need for collective responses. As a social worker, working at the very, at the neighborhood level, at the local level, for instance, you can constantly emphasize we need collective responses. And a collective response does not necessarily mean like at the national level. Even at the neighborhood level, you can address these issues collectively. By bringing people together, by thinking about strategies on how to overcome individual issues, individual polarization between some people in the neighborhood who have done the right thing and other people who cannot do the right thing. Bring people together, politicize the issue, and collectivize or think about collective responses. Increase trust and give voice to people who think and believe they don't have a voice. But again, that is at the core of the social work profession. Give voice to the voiceless. Make sure that people start to trust each other again in the first place, social workers in the first place, but also increase trust in society, in institutions. Because underlying to these cleavages is a huge, strong feeling of distrust. And bridge social divides at the local level through community practice. That is the key thing that you need to do. At that local level, try to bridge these social divides. And of course, that's not easy. That is a very difficult thing to do. But there are many examples, and I'm sure we will talk about examples, that at the local level, you can achieve that. You can bring people together, you can bring people in contact with each other. But what usually happens when a climate policy is enacted, that this is a top-down process. And usually some, top boss from the administration of politics then comes down to explain why this is good for everyone in the neighborhood that we do this. And then people are surprised, but why are so many people opposed to this? Because you did not take their needs seriously. People don't have the feeling that they are being listened to. They are told something, but they are not being listened to. And that is exactly what you can do at the local level. Social work creates the context that brings people together, builds networks to enable these more structural responses. And I wish you all the best of luck with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wim. You can take a seat with us. I invite you to already think about your questions, because at the end of this session, I will give the floor to this room, to you all, and you can pose a question, one per person. So 3 questions are allowed, at least. But let's have a talk now with Christophe and Karen. Christophe and Karen will speak in Dutch, but we have simultaneously translation, so take your headphones if you need them. I will keep on trying to talk in English to keep things simple. Christophe, can you first maybe perhaps explain a little bit who you are and where you come from?
Good morning, everybody.
In het Nederlands.
Ja, goedemorgen allemaal.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Christophe, and I will be 50 years old this year. I live in Kortrijk, and I've had many different jobs. I was, self-employed. I worked in factories, had different jobs, but I also was in huge depression, had huge debts after a relationship that finished, and then I actually chose to start a training to become an expert by experience in poverty. And thanks to my traineeship within the network, I actually was able to find a job that I really liked. And so this is the current situation. Christophe?
Talk of Wim. What was the most striking message you have heard?
For me personally, the fact that people in poverty indeed do need to face, most of the challenges that are involved with the climate change, but they're not really responsible for climate change at the same time. So they do face the consequences the most, but they're not responsible for them. For example, traveling. They don't have the luxury of traveling by plane somewhere. Very often they don't have a car. they have to try and use public transport instead.
You use public transport just to get to our workplace?
Ik maak dus gebruik van het openbaar vervoer.
Yes, I do use public transport. So I go from Kortrijk to Brussels. So by train, that's okay. But now we've got the new mobility plan, and many things have changed. So in the morning, I have to leave my house at 6 or 10 past 6 to be in Brussels. And so in order to be able to do my job, I travel about 5 to 6 hours.
Ik woon op 3 kilometer fiets.
Indeed, I actually live about 3 kilometers from the station, and but with the public transport plan that has been changed recently, it's not easy, and very often buses are not correct. I really need to be on time in the station to catch a train, so I have a lot of waiting time.
But this is your reality and the reality of a lot of people in poverty who work and still are just making ends meet. Eh? Okay. Karen, over to you. Can you also a little bit elaborate in Dutch on your trajectory? You've been in Buurtwerk Lampke for 30 years now. When did you start and what's your professional career?
Okay.
Well, I'm Karen. Indeed, about 30 years ago, I started. When I finished my studies, I studied social cultural work, and I started as a volunteer in Lampeke because it was a second-hand shop for clothes, and it was a very nice start. And then a year later, I actually was able to work there as a professional, first of all for kids, and then I've just evolved. Now I'm doing coordination, but we're not just coordinating top down. No, we're about 35 people in total in the organization, and we're always in the fields, both feet in the fields, let's say.
Your organization is also recognized as an association where people in poverty take the floor, amongst other recognitions. Can you explain a little bit? The last slide of Wim was how can social work be an actor in this process of climate justice? And with people in poverty, he said something about giving voice and so on. Can you explain this? This is quite nice to hear, but how do we do that in reality? That's your job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, what Wim actually mentioned, well, I've already heard your talk several times. I've read your yellow book, which is really very interesting to read. But you always have the opposition between green and yellow, and I do understand it. But I think that right now we need to try and find a collective response once again, try to reconnect. I really am a fan, let's say, of neighborhood centers and community work, because people actually come to the community work and center because it's fun, not only because they have questions, not because they are in need for help, but we try to actually set up a community with several people, and with our community center, we're actually at a crossroads of all those different lives, because all those people, they just pass, and people who are working in our center as trainee, professional, or whatever, or expert by experience, well, we have those crossroads, and then you encounter some things and problems, and then you do find the alternatives. Maybe people don't find the alternatives themselves, but we need to try and find alternatives together. And according to me, it's essential to not just do this with people in poverty, because we do not want to focus on the individual debt model, but we always try to focus, let's say, on the society, but we also need to focus on the policymakers, those who have, those who, can help.
Or vulnerable groups, to take it a little bit broader. What kind of problems do they talk about that touch on the social level, but also on the climate issue. And what do you do actually about that with them?
Ja, er zijn heel wat thema's.
Well, there are numerous topics, but two topics are very often mentioned. First of all, mobility. So I think that is indeed not a coincidence. And energy and housing, right?
One of the three? Allez, one of the three?
Ik zei er twee, maar dus ook...
Ja.
Well, two. Well, I've got two topics, but well, I can take mobility, for example. Okay, now we are operating in a city context. Of course, this is different. If people are in rural areas, there are different problems. Leuven is a very small city, but we do have, it's a city, right? And a lot of people who come to our community centre, they don't have a job where they get a car, a company car. Very often it's about people who clean houses and they have to go from one house to another. Very often they need to use public transport. They don't have any car. They don't have a car, or it's a very polluting car. A bike or an electric bike that they actually sold or bought, like in Macro or anywhere else. Well, it's broken down after a week or 2 weeks, and then they don't have any funds to repair it. But it's linked to their job, and it's very important. As you said, they really need mobility, a good way of being mobile to be able to do their job. But it's difficult for them. And then you do see that those people are then passing by with the cargo bikes and the electric bikes, even children who have electric bikes. Okay, well, maybe that's a different discussion, but well, we then try and have talks with people, and throughout the years we also have a lot of talks with these people. For example, for the children, when people arrive with the children or leave with the children, we can talk with them, and then you try and find alternatives. I know that the city of Leuven also has introduced shared cargo bikes, shared bikes, but people don't use it because it's too difficult, or it's a very difficult digital system and people don't really know how to use them, and it's not really something that is meeting their needs. We did some survey, and then you hear people saying, well, I don't need a bike 1 day a week, I need it each and every day. And then last year I was able to also participate in a project of Greenpeace, and then we were able to buy a number of electric bikes for adults, and then we've given them, it's some kind of leasing program, let's say, for the people, made to measure, and people really want to pay for that kind of mobility, but we then follow their financial pace, so that they can lease it according to their financial pace. But you need to look for a solution together. So you see, okay, there is an issue, there is a problem, but then you need to look for a solution together. And now this week I was in discussion with the city of Leuven and with some of the academics and researchers, and then they didn't really think about the fact that, okay, people actually need a bike each and every day of the week, not just 1 day a week. And this is something that they will now take into account for the next project. Okay, thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about not only what Lampke does, but the 61 associations from the Network Against Poverty. All this knowledge that we get from the local organizations, we collect it together, and you're one of the team members who are collectivizing all this knowledge. Can you elaborate a little bit on your role and on what we do at the Flemish level with all these voices and signals that we get from people in poverty, perhaps maybe on housing?
Ja, ik zet er dus...
Well, I'm here as an expert by experience, and there are very few experts by experience who work on a policy level or a policy making level. So it's a very special job. And why I try to really participate is to really try to voice their, the world of the people who are in need and in poverty towards the policymakers, because we need, and for example, social housing. For social housing, there are about 178,000 people on the waiting list. Well, there is no budget, or if there is a budget, they don't really do anything with it. And people who are on the waiting list are now on the private market, and the prices are just increasing constantly. Well, of course, they are actually, let's say, on the private market to rent houses, and those houses are really not the most well up-to-date houses. And so we see for housing that we need more social housing, we need better social housing, but also for the private market, the private rental market. So the solar panels, for example, maybe they need to be, well, stimulated. They need to be maybe obliged to install solar panels on those private houses as well, because very often now the tenants, it depends on whether the owner wants to invest in the dwelling or not. And for example, maybe you can link also the, let's say, the rent to the energy performance certificates, and that might already be an extra incentive for the owner.
Actually, in the Network Against Poverty, we are very much hoping that, for example, the owners who let their houses are activated to renovate their houses.
Ja, met dan een heel groot gevaar, hè?
Ja.
Yeah, but it does. Yeah, but if those houses are then up to date, then you have a danger that they are being rented at a different kind of price.
Of course. I want to give the floor to I want to give you a voice. Are there questions for one of those three persons or reflections? Yes, totally in the back. There's somebody with a mic. You need to speak in the mic because this is a live stream also. I'm looking for the girl with the mic is lost. She's not here. We have a mic and we have a girl and she's coming towards you. So everything will be fine.
Thank you very much. My name is Clotilde. I work for Eurodiaconia. I have a question to Mr. Van Lancker. Thank you for your presentation. I really think you have a right diagnosis, but I think you're a bit optimistic as to the solution. Social Climate Fund, 62 billion over 7 years for 27 member states, so it's nothing. The European Union itself says we need more than 600 billion a year just for investment to be climate neutral. And you say we need to reinforce our welfare state that is actually currently collapsing even without the necessary investment in green policies. Where's your hope? I mean, I don't think what you say is going to happen. I think the poor will be sacrificed for this transformation. Thank you.
Thank you. Wim? Why are you so optimistic? Are you just a dreamer?
It's even worse. I mean, because welfare states are very growth dependent, and everything is geared towards increasing economic growth, but economic growth is very strongly associated with more carbon emissions. And so it's not only about how are we going to garner sufficient resources and what are member states actually going to do with this, and then member states and regions and local levels, but also how can we think about a different model that sustains a welfare state that works for all without being so growth dependent? And that is even a bigger question, I would say. And so I was trying to, not necessarily to be optimistic, but to sort of, I mean, if we think about this as one big issue that is so radical or needs such a radical transformation, and we need to change everything at once at the same time, then no politician will actually find the courage to do something with that. So I think it's helpful to sort of split it up a little bit in different sets of problems. And one of the issues is that the European Union, I mean, I'm actually optimistic or hopeful that the European Union level will lead to more and faster change than if you leave it to the member states alone. And the scale of things is much bigger at the European Union level. And at the same time, we've seen policies enacted, we've seen directives enacted, we've seen policy initiatives that we thought were unthinkable only 5 years ago. Like the minimum wage directive, for instance. I mean, that is really a transformative change at the European Union level. Before that, it was always, no, but this is member states' competencies, we cannot do anything with that, and so on and so forth. Now it's like, okay, this is real. And so, yeah, I think the European Union level will hopefully be our sort of guiding beacon in a way to force member states, to force politicians, to force different politicians from different colors, different parties, different party affiliations to think about this, to more deeply, more thoroughly, and more practically speaking, I think the social climate funds, I mean, even for a country like Belgium, this will be a significant amount of money that can be used for the better, or can be used, of course, in ways that are not very helpful. And that will be a key problem where, at the local level, at the level of member states, social workers, can politicize this issue and emphasize, keep on giving that message to all the structures in which they are involved. Like, this is important. We need to think about radical different ways. It is, of course, not only the role of social workers, of academics, of social policy makers, people in administrations, people in civil society organizations. I think we will need to muster all of these, or to garner all of these resources together to make a change there. But I'm not. If I'm looking at the big picture, I'm not optimistic at all in the sense of the sheer size of the problem and the radical transformation we need. But at the same time, there are developments that I think, but we can work with that, even at the local level, even at the level of social workers. And it's about then political and ideological choices on how we are going to use the resources we have. And that is, of course, that's of course a challenge and a societal issue which will be impacted by the social, economic, and cultural divides I've been talking about. So.
Okay, thank you. There's another hand raising. The mic is coming your way. It's completely the opposite. Yeah.
My name is Jan Smits. I work for Stebo, Limburg organization, also community developers. And I wanted to address a little bit on the crack, because the glass is always half full or half empty. And we rather work with a half full glass point of view, because I think, nevertheless, there needs to be a lot of work to be done. On the field, we have some good practices that are working, actually, and in leaving no one behind. And for instance, in Limburg province, in the eastern part of Flanders, we are leading the energy house, and we are trying to make there the difference. For instance, some good practices are collective renovations of social neighborhoods, where we're working directly with the people who are underprivileged, to help them with some guidance, expertise, with architects, engineers from our side. They don't have to pay for it, and we help them collectively with the right advice to renovate it, but also with support financially on their own pace. It's perhaps not enough, and it's still not enough, but it's a good practice that can be highlighted all over perhaps Europe. Mm-hmm. And next to that, for people who are renting a house, we also already leading by example, I think in Belgium, with energy scans. So we're giving education to people living in a house that's not their own, to make them more aware, educate them about what they can do even though the house is not well designed, they can still make a difference by lower their carbon footprint and lower their invoices with energy. So I think we should show more of the things that work and highlight them. Besides, of course, the academic voice, that's important because we can strengthen each other in that matter.
Thank you for your reflection and your case. Somebody else? Yes? I see a new hand in the middle. If you want to address a question to somebody specifically, just say it.
No, it's more a reflection than a question. I'm Paolo from Italy. I want to underline, because we're talking about money, no? The problem is also money, how to change everything. And I want to highlight a bit the role of the school, because I think that, at least in Italy, the school is a bit in a bubble. Like, we don't talk about climate change, we don't, maybe we talk, but more theoretically. So I really think that we should invest more in the education, because to do that, we not change everything. But if we start to change a bit the mindset of the students, of the kids, that those students will become adults, and they will start to have a right mindset about this. Maybe some of them will have possibilities, some of them no, but we'll have a common mindset in this direction. So I think the school is really important, and it's for free. So we should invest more.
I don't know if you know, but in Belgium we had a certain amount of youngsters going on climate strike. And they did that for quite a few weeks and months. I don't know, you know this kind of movement of youngsters in Italy?
No.
Ah, yeah. We had it, and it was quite an uprising, but it didn't really change policies. But with youngsters and young 20, yeah, they're really already in this kind of mindset. But also there was a social divide in what kind of youngsters were there on the march every Friday. Were the youngsters of parents who are high skilled and high educated. Okay.
Heidi, mag ik nog iets zeggen?
Oh, a lot of hands now. Oh, sorry. I will give the word to the floor. It was there and there. Yeah. I will come to you later.
Hi, my name's Eileen Lauster. I'm a PhD student and recently completed a research project with young people on active travel in the UK. I was just curious about the factors about social support, and one of the things I keep thinking about as a social worker that would have been trained in community development, is that we're not including the industries. We're not including the car industry. Like, as social workers, we tend to work with marginalized groups, with people that are in poverty or homelessness. But I often think about the car dealership owner and how much counseling they must need, because their whole industry needs to collapse. Likewise with the petro industry, all these people. Like, is there a role for social workers to do palliative care for these? I know it sounds funny, but it would go a long way, because they are the ones really driving the climate emissions.
Yeah, actually you have a really strong point, I think. So can I react, or somebody else wants to? Because in the session yesterday, we actually had some cases like Project Papillon of Samo, who worked with Bosch to distribute wash machines who are climate friendly. And actually the example of the bike leasing is also...
Ja, maar mag ik daar nog iets anders aan toevoegen? Vanuit Lampen...
If I may add something else, from the community work, Lampeke, we think that working with the people themselves is really important, and I completely agree with the person from Limburg who talked just a minute ago. The policy level is very important. In Leuven, we have Leuven 2030. It's a network organization in Leuven, and the city of Leuven is a member of that, but also many other partners, including companies, also private people, midfield organizations, and so on, but also those companies, the industry. So we are also a member of the board of directors of Leuven 2030, and all people who were a member of that organization. So the highly educated people did not know that there were 20% of people in Leuven who lived in poverty. So they could not really imagine that, could not really imagine what impact that had. So we started to educate those people actually about this. And that's a shared responsibility together with the politicians and with the companies to do that in order to tackle that social injustice. And it's important that we do that from the beginning onwards and not just do that at the end. No, from the beginning onwards, take those people in your story and let them see what the reality is and share that perspective with the different stakeholders.
Or reflection.
Ja, ik ben wel heel enthousiast.
I live in Hasselt, and there we had the booklet, Climate Crisis is a Child's Right question. So that's a very important booklet, and we distributed that in the area. So in this way, we try to involve everybody who is interested in this. I work at the SAMO, and it's often very difficult to include the professional side, the industry, in matters such as poverty and so on, because yeah, it's hard. I am very excited, I am very enthusiastic, but it's hard to share that enthusiasm. But by means of these initiatives, such as this booklet, we can really improve that. And so this is also a way to attract young people, students, and so on. So maybe this is a good idea for the Italian colleague to promote this. So it's €5. This booklet costs €5, and I've brought it with me, if you're interested.
There was still another question in the front rows. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Muna from France, and I would like to hear our expert by experience and Karen, the social worker, about how you interact with policymakers. And I can give you also a little experience is that some policymakers, they have the consultation, they have the discussion with the concerned people, the target public. So they hear all their needs, and at the end, it becomes all very technical. So they say, oh, you need A, B, C, D, but we only have this much money to put, and there's this regulation, 1, 2, 3, 50 regulations, so this is what we are going to do. And they could have planned this even without the discussion. So how do we converge? How do we really make the policy together? Maybe we need, as you said, Karen, to educate those who decide, but beforehand, before even they start making the policy, and maybe we need to change this setting of consultation or discussion. How can we change the format? Thank you.
I think this is really a question for you, Christophe.
There is a very famous quote of Gandhi: everything what you do for me, without me, you do that against me. And that's the same in policy making. If policymakers want to make a good policy, they have to make sure that that policy is applicable to everybody. And that's why we are constantly asking the network against poverty to really focus on that, to involve everybody from the beginning onwards, even before making that policy. So as soon as you start thinking about that policy, it's important to include people that have the experience, experts by experience, and so on. And that's what we try to do. People from organizations, people with experience in poverty, really take them along with us in the whole journey.
Like you described, So our local organizations really come to Brussels. We prepare this with people in poverty themselves. We make a strong paper with their recommendations, also with their life experiences. And then we go to policymakers and explain it. And then afterwards, they do nothing or just a little bit, or what they already planning to do. But this is a kind of, perseverance and keep on talking with them and winning hearts, sometimes one by one from policymakers. And then we have elections and we can start all over for 5 years.
Nog iets toevoegen?
Ja.
Ik denk van...
I think from the neighborhood organization, what we do is making relations with people, making connections with people in poverty, but also people in poverty and other people in society. That's something that's time intensive, but it's really valuable. It really has its good consequences. So we try to build up a relationship with those people. We are not always in agreement with each other, but we are always on speaking terms. We never bash the government either. That's not really our belief or our recipe for success. We don't want that polarization. We want to connect with each other. And that's what we do as an organization. We talk to them and we really work on that relation. We are very patient as well. And in that way, we try to book small successes, slowly but steadily. We really try to build that relationship up to a point where we are invited ourselves by the policymakers when they want to draw up a policy. But you do need a lot of patience, that's a fact.
Maybe it's also interesting for you because you're not from Belgium. The Network Against Poverty and our local self-advocacy organizations succeeded in 2003, so 20 years ago, to have their own legislation, and we are recognized by the Flemish government to do the policy participation of people in poverty themselves. So we have this kind of mandate. It's not easy to fulfill it in practice, but we have it, and we're also subsidized to do it. Not enough money, of course, but we do it. So it really helps when you're in the structural process of giving voice and have a kind of basis on which you can do it. And you make relations on the local level with people personally, but you also have a structural basis on where you are recognized to do this kind of voice giving with people in poverty themselves. And there are also criteria in our legislation on how we do this. The fact we always work in tandem, we say, or in duo. My expertise shared with that of Christophe, and then we go to policymakers in this kind of setup. Yeah, I think our time has gone. Is everybody okay that we are wrapping up, or are there still really urgent questions or reflections? I have a last look. No? Then I think we can close this session. I really want to thank you all for the interaction, your interesting questions and reflections, and we can talk further with coffee. Thank you.